Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to let you know, we'll start the presentation in about 1 minute. Hello, everyone. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We'll start the presentation in about 30 seconds. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety Health Magazine webcast, Leading and Lagging Indicators, Keys to Success, sponsored by KPA. This is Alan Ferguson, Associate Editor at Safety and Health, and co-host of the On the Safe Side podcast, and I'm moderating today's event. Thank you once again for joining us, and before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items. As a disclaimer, the views of today's speaker and organization are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety Health Magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the council or the magazine endorses those items. After today's presentation, we'll conduct a question and answer session with our speaker. If you have a question, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and press the send button. We welcome your questions at any time during today's event. You don't have to wait for the Q&A to begin. We might not get to every question, but the good news is unanswered questions will be forwarded to today's sponsor. Also, after this presentation, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, and I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. Just to let you know, this webcast will be archived, so you can access it after today's live event to view this webcast and all of our past webcasts. Please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events, so you may also receive a link in a post-event email. With that, let's introduce our speaker. With us today is Greg Horn. Greg is an environmental health and safety professional with more than 8 years of diverse experience in a variety of industries, including warehousing, distribution, logistics, specialty chemical manufacturing, and automotive. He leverages this experience as an EHS risk management consultant with KPA to provide key guidance to clients and ensure that they have all the necessary information and resources to keep their employees and brand safe. Again, we thank you all for tuning in this presentation. Greg, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Alan. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, appreciate the introduction, Alan. Just going to mention again, so I've been at KPA, Kiprall Associates for over 9 months, but my experience in the EHS field, I've been building for over the past 8 years. So started my career working in the specialty chemicals manufacturing industry, where I did a lot of exposure monitoring and risk assessment. And most recently, worked in warehousing and logistics as a warehouse safety manager for a series of warehouses. Last warehouse I managed, we had over 2,500 employees, and during my time there, tracking and leveraging leading and lagging indicators was a huge part of my job. So, hoping today that I can share some insights or tips that definitely help me provide a safe workplace to all of our warehouse associates, and might help you with the use and application of leading and lagging indicators in your workplace. Last piece of housekeeping. I'm obviously joining you all from home. So with that, just want to preface that I have a mini zoo at home. I've got 2 dogs and 3 cats. So I apologize in advance if got any unexpected background noise, or somebody has the audacity to walk on the public sidewalk in front of my house. My dogs are going to let me know. So not planning on any guest speakers other than myself, but hopefully the kitties are napping away for the next hour. All right. So with that, going to move on and share our agenda for this afternoon. You'll see we've already made some progress and knocked out the introduction, so small victories. Next, I'm going to start out by quickly defining leading and lagging indicators, at least as I understand them and as I've used them. After that, we're going to dive a bit more deeply into each, of course, and then we're going to finish off, as Alan said, with any questions or comments you may have, as well as share some contact info and maybe some additional resources that might help you in the future. So that sounds good. We're going to jump right into it. So thought it might be a good idea for us to start this presentation in this webcast by defining leading and lagging indicators. So we'll start with leading indicators. As the name might suggest, leading indicators are metrics or inputs that can be used to predict or influence future results. A common example of a leading indicator that you might be familiar with or use, especially for safety professionals, would be inspections and audits. And we're definitely going to jump into a few more in a little bit. Next, we have your lagging indicators. So lagging indicators are metrics that measure past performance. An example that everybody is probably familiar with would be injuries or incidents or injury or incident rates. Once somebody's injured, we can't change that, right? It's already happened, and that's what makes it a lagging indicator. Most of you, whether you've realized it or not, you're probably using leading and lagging indicators on a daily basis to influence your decisions at work. So the goal of our discussion today is just to make sure that you're aware of the leading and lagging indicators that you already may be using, introduce you to some new ones, and how you can further leverage both to maximize and improve performance. Whether for you that's injury reduction and prevention, increased production, maybe a reduction in quality misses or errors, the list goes on. They can be applied across the board. So um, now, I know I keep saying leading and lagging indicators, but I'm actually going to switch things up on you here just to keep you engaged and on your toes. And we're going to start by breaking down lagging indicators. So I just mentioned this, but the theory and application of leading and lagging indicators can be applied to more than just safety. I'll mostly be talking about them today from a safety perspective, but you absolutely can use them from a quality or production standpoint as well. Same goes for these examples we're going to be discussing. All right, so lagging indicators, as defined before, if we're looking at lagging indicators or data, it means that something's already happened. That something could be an injury incident, somebody got hurt, right? Now we need to figure out why and how, but we unfortunately can't change that one of our employees was injured. It could be an equipment failure. It could be a missed deadline. It could be a service or quality defect. We can't change the outcome once it's happened, but it doesn't mean that we can't learn from it and do better in the future. Let's continue by jumping into a few examples of lagging indicators and how you can leverage those to improve your performance in the future. All right, so injury and incident performance are some of the most common lagging indicators used from a safety perspective. Injuries are bad, incidents are certainly bad, right? But what is even worse is if we don't learn from them. How can we best learn from them? Well, first, we've got to know about them. So I'll preface this by saying if you have a workplace with a truly low incident rate, uh, I have clients who, where it's a time of year where we're working through OSHA 300A summary posting, and they're going on, 3 or 4 years posting goose eggs in terms of incidents. First, I'll say congrats and nice work to you all. But with that, it doesn't mean the work is done. This will just allow you to focus on other areas of risk in your workplace that maybe we'll touch on later. So if you aren't so lucky, it is really important that your employees at least have enough trust to report their injuries. Probably sounds pretty obvious, especially to a group of safety professionals, but in general industry, there's been a history of underreporting or sweeping incidents under the rug due to mistrust and fear of repercussions or punishments. But if your injuries aren't being reported, you can't find out what caused the injury, and then we certainly can't correct, what caused it. Maybe for you in your workplace, step one to using lagging indicators is just to improve culture and foster a healthy environment for incident reporting where people feel safe, reporting their injuries to leadership. Not to oversimplify that, because obviously it takes a lot of work to establish a solid reporting system and build trust with employees. But when it comes to injury and incident response, you can only get better if you know where things are going wrong. Now, in order to do that, once we've got people reporting injuries, you need to have quality injury data. So now what? Often when somebody gets injured, sometimes the first instinct, and I've been guilty of this, is to blame the individual. It's human nature to begin making an assessment of things and attempting to draw conclusions before we have all of the information and the facts. I've heard things like, Oh, we have an injury. Oh, Joe is a klutz. That's why he slipped and fell. I know Joe. He just doesn't pay attention. As a corrective action, we're gonna coach Joe and we're gonna tell him to be careful next time. And we might even do a shop meeting and remind everyone else, right? Or you may have heard something like, yeah, Sandy, she probably wasn't paying attention. I bet that's why she cut her finger. Not only is this taking the easy way out, but we're not fixing the problem. To effectively use injuries or incidents as lagging indicators, step one is to conduct a thorough investigation and a root cause analysis to understand why the injury or incident truly happened. If we don't do that, then any injury or incident data will be skewed and it's going to point us in the wrong direction. Ultimately, we're going to be doomed to repeat the same mistakes. Now, might be familiar with my friend the problem weed or dandelion here, but if not, um, uh, an analogy I like to use for assessing incidents and root cause analysis is comparing them to dandelions, or weeds. What you see at the surface are the symptoms of the problem. They're pretty overt, right? It's easy to see, hey, here's the issue. Joe slipped and got hurt. Pretty clear, right? But digging deeper below the surface is what's going to reveal what's causing or encouraging or forcing the symptoms. So we're going to touch very quickly on what, in my opinion, a good root cause analysis should look like. I will say this is a topic that I could spend a few hours on, and I have in the past, but I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet today. As I said before, usually if you're blaming the behavior, you're missing the true root cause. You should be asking what situation or conditions forced, encouraged, or allowed the behavior. So I made a joke about a guy named Joe earlier, right? We're going to use him as an example in a hypothetical scenario. So I'll give you a little background about Joe, pretend Joe. Um, this part is true though. So I live in the greater Philly area. That's where I'm joining you guys from today. And a few weeks ago, we had some serious winter weather. So we had a day where we had about 6 to 8 inches of snow, followed by a few days of fluctuating temperatures, which resulted in the snow melting and something I call refreeze occurring, causing very slippery, icy conditions. So if you're from a warmer part of the country or unfamiliar with the term refreeze, first off, I'm jealous, but it's basically when you have snow and during the day, the snow melts as it gets warmer, right? Resulting in wet areas, maybe puddles and, uneven surfaces. But at night, the temperatures drop below freezing and it gets cold enough where that melted snow and those puddles freeze over and turn to ice. If this happens for a few days in a row, and definitely in eastern Pennsylvania, that's usually what we see, you could be at risk at having an ice skating rink in an area like a parking lot. So, anyway, we'll go back to Joe. So, Joe, after pulling into the employee lot parking lot one morning, Joe steps out of his car. He's ready to go, ready to get to work, and he walking towards the building and slips on a patch of ice. He falls, he sustains a pretty nasty contusion that requires medical attention and puts him on limited duty for a few days. Could have been worse, could have been a broken bone, right? Um, I chose this example because this is a situation that I've seen happen before. And in my previous experience, the initial reaction from the leadership was somewhat similar to, the joke I made earlier. Oh, Joe's a klutz. He should have been paying attention. I changed his name, but the response was very similar. Fortunately, for incidents like this, we required our leaders to conduct a formal deep dive investigation and root cause analysis to determine what actually happened. So after gathering any relevant information during our investigation, we're not going to focus too much on the investigation right now. We began breaking down the root cause. So, why did Joe slip? Because there was ice on the ground in the parking lot. Then we asked ourselves, all right, well, why was there ice on the ground in the parking lot? We're not going to blame Joe. Why was the ice there? Well, but after we thought about it and discussed it, we realized the snow had melted and it refroze in the lot. All right, why did the snow melt and refreeze? Because of fluctuations in weather conditions that are not uncommon in our area of the country during this time of year. So, all right, the next question from our leadership team, completely fair question. All right, we shoveled and salted for the snow. Why didn't we salt the ice? Well, maybe we didn't consider the potential for refreeze, or maybe we weren't monitoring the weather conditions. Next question was, what does our winter weather procedure say? Does it even address refreeze? Does it address weather monitoring during adverse conditions? so on and so forth. You get the point, right? So what we learned was that our procedure didn't have any follow-up actions after the initial response to a snow event. We'd plow, we'd shovel, we'd salt, and that was it. After our discussion and analysis, we found that the root cause of the incident was gaps in our procedure. It wasn't Joe being a klutz, it was gaps in our procedure. So, as a corrective action, what we did was we updated our procedure to include protocols for both refreeze and requirements for daily monitoring of physical outside conditions on our property during freezing temperatures. We supplemented that with training and coaching to relevant members of the team. So I know that was a little long-winded. I told you I'm passionate about root cause analysis, but I hope this shows how you can leverage lagging indicators like an injury or an incident to make serious changes and improve future performance if you avoid just resorting to blaming the individual or the behavior and keep digging deeper. So, as I said before, if we don't conduct quality investigations or root cause analysis, we can't even trust our lagging indicator data. Think of the dandelion. So, another mini rant. So, in the summertime, my wife has me out almost every weekend pulling weeds. I usually try to start early in the morning because it gets hot, but I'm a soccer fan, so maybe there's a match on in the morning and I put it off till the afternoon, right? But as the day goes on, I start pulling weeds, but it starts getting hotter and hotter. So I start to rush, and instead of pulling the weeds out by the root, I just start ripping the top off so it looks nice, and my wife will dismiss me for the day, if you could say, right? But guess what? A few weeks later, I find myself out in the sun just pulling the same weeds that thought I plucked out a few weeks ago. So side note, if you have a dandelion problem, you can eat dandelions. I was raised on dandelion salads, so they're very good and healthy. Look it up. But this is my story about pulling weeds out, right? It's no different than addressing root causes in the workplace. We could have blamed Joe for not paying attention and left it at that, but guess what? Eventually, maybe it's next week when we have similar conditions, maybe it's next month or next year, we'd see another slip and fall because the root is still hiding there under the surface. Maybe next time it's a customer. So, if it's a customer, how is it going to hold up in court if we call them clumsy, right? Not to be too intense or serious, but the point is that there's very real consequences if we aren't identifying true root causes. And by default, there's many benefits if we do. So once we're on the same page in terms of RCA, root cause analysis, and we're confident in the quality of our data, which is important, you'll hear me say that time and time again, we can begin assessing our trends and developing actions to address those trends, often called trends and actions. So the name's somewhat self-explanatory, but basically the goal here is to collect quality data, analyze it to determine any trends, and then establish actions to address those trends. Some examples of trends you might be able to identify when reviewing data could be incident type. Pretty straightforward, right? Are we seeing a higher frequency of certain incident types? Maybe we have a high rate of injuries related to lifting. Maybe it's slips, trips, and falls. You could get a bit more granular and look at the shift or the hour of the day that the injuries are occurring. Maybe we're seeing a higher incident rate during the night shift or in the last couple hours of a specific shift, especially if you have folks working overnight, working 10-hour shifts. Towards the end of a long shift, it's easy to get fatigued and complacent and make some mistakes. Another trend you could be looking at is the tenure of your employees. So maybe if you're seeing more injuries occur to newer employees, this is a warning sign or a signal for you to look at the quality of your training program or training material. The list can go on, and like I said, you can get as granular as you want if you have the data and it's accurate. Now, in a healthy safety culture or management system, trends and actions can be a great example of harmony between lagging and leading indicators. And yes, that is a custom Photoshop job, so very proud of that. Although that might be a perfect segue into leading indicators, not going to go there yet. I did want to share just a brief example of how you might use your injury data to identify and address a concerning trend. So again, this is made up data, but a realistic example you might see as part of what I would call a trends in action plan or document. Pardon me. All right. So Say, for example, we're reviewing last year's performance and we found that we had 7 injuries related to slips, trips, or falls. We dig a bit deeper into the specifics into our data, and we find that 5 out of 7 of these injuries were related to housekeeping. Could have been an employee tripping over debris from a damaged wooden pallet, could be employees slipping from spilled liquids that weren't cleaned up, or an extension cord run across a walkway. First, it's important to note that if we didn't do good investigations and root cause analysis, we might not even know that we have a housekeeping problem that's causing injuries. But fortunately, for the sake of this example, we did. So now looking at this trend, we found that we do indeed have an opportunity to improve housekeeping and accountability by looking at our lagging indicator data. Until now, we've kept an eye on housekeeping, right? And occasionally we'll ask employees to tidy up, but we have no formal plan. So in hopes of addressing this trend that we work so hard to identify, we established a housekeeping program. I'm a firm believer in leadership and management driving accountability and ownership of their specific areas. So we decided that the managers of areas, right, the owners of certain areas in our facility would now be required to conduct and document a daily walk of their areas. With everybody's input, we create a checklist that includes high risk areas and common hazards based on past data. To ensure completion and quality, the daily submissions are tracked and we review the progress in the completion during monthly leadership meetings. Not only to ensure quality again, but also the completion and to identify any additional trends. Maybe we see spikes and defects in certain areas that we weren't expecting, or a spike in a certain, type of defect, like maybe we're seeing a lot of issues with, as I said before, damaged wooden pallets. So it gives us the opportunity to look at the types of pallets we're ordering. Maybe we are going for the most cost effective, and it's not a high quality pallet with high quality wood, and it gives us an opportunity to work with our vendors to try a different pallet, or maybe just scrap that and try a new vendor, right? So again, like, doing something like that might allow you to identify additional trends that are contributing to the problem. So um, it's worth saying that not always will your actions deliver the intended outcome. So it's important to assess the efficacy and progress. If we look back after a few months and we continue to see slip, trip, and fall injuries occurring the same rate, maybe we need to adjust our approach for the daily audits. Do we increase the frequency or the required attendees for the audits? Do we scrap the idea altogether and consider a new approach to address this trend? With this approach to leveraging your lagging indicators, you'll continually drive improvements to the trends you are targeting. And once you establish and sustain your actions, you can begin targeting new trends. So that's the idea. All right. So now we're going to transition to leading indicators. In my opinion, and again, this is my opinion, if you had to choose, this is where the majority of your time or your effort should be invested. You could call it 60-40 split or a 70-30, but I like to think of leading indicators in inputs as being proactive, where strictly relying on lagging indicators is a bit reactive. It's very reactive, right? You're always playing from behind. But as I just touched on, there are benefits to using your lagging indicators, but the goal is to use them in harmony with your leading indicators. So we already touched on the definition of leading indicators as metrics that predict future performance. I also like to call them leading inputs and think of these as proactive measures or efforts that influence future performance. Some common examples that you might be familiar with: employee safety reporting, like near miss reporting, inspections and audits, training, or more specifically, training completion or training quality, safety observations like behavior-based safety, safety meetings. Oh, sorry. I accidentally slapped my escape button there. Preventative maintenance on equipment and tools, the list goes on. So as a part of building and maintaining a healthy safety culture, you should be putting a lot of focus on your leading indicators. Now, we're going to start with one of the most common forms of employee safety reporting: near misses. Employee near miss reporting can be a very effective leading input if you're using it correctly. One that not only highlights areas of risk or opportunity, but also empowers your employees to participate in building and sustaining a safe work culture. Again, that's if you're doing it right. So if you aren't familiar, A near miss is defined as an unplanned event that doesn't result in injury or death, but it could have. So these types of near incidents, they often go unreported because, well, although something almost happened, it didn't. We got lucky. However, by not reporting near misses, employees are also not doing anything to prevent potentially more serious incidents from occurring in the future. Near misses occur every day in every industry, and most serious, catastrophic, and loss producing incidents are preceded by these warnings. So, on the right hand of the side, you'll see what we often refer to as the safety pyramid. You may or may not be familiar with the safety pyramid, but the basic idea or theory is that the more unsafe behaviors and hazards we allow in our workplace, the higher potential for more serious incidents to occur. So, although less severe incidents often, occur more often, these are the ones that typically go undocumented. They don't get as much attention because they're less severe and maybe again, maybe it was just a near incident. To reduce the potential for more serious incidents to occur, our efforts should be focused on this bottom portion of the pyramid here and making it a habit to observe, investigate, and document each incident thoroughly, no matter how minor. Now, getting employees on board and garnering near miss reports is half the battle. It'll take some work to educate them on what exactly constitutes a near miss, and I often see confusion with that. And also, how are they even supposed to go about reporting them or educating them on the reporting system? What we do as a leadership team with that information is what will ultimately determine the success of a near miss reporting program. It's great that we're getting all of this data and all of these reports, but what are we doing with it? If you aren't addressing hazardous conditions reported by employees, they can quickly lose trust and you'll see participation decrease soon after. Leadership commitment is a very key first step to a successful program. Then, to effectively use near miss reports as a leading input, you're relying on employees to report unsafe conditions, right? So you can establish this program, but if employees aren't reporting, there's nothing you can do, right? You don't know where to work. As I already said, employees need to understand how to report near misses and what to expect when they do. And to reduce or eliminate the risk, you need to investigate the root cause of the near miss and correct it to prevent reoccurrence. Once you put all these pieces together, you have a system that generates leading indicator data for you, which will allow you to proactively identify and reduce risk, ultimately improving your culture by keeping employees safe. As you can probably tell, I am a huge fan of near miss reporting, and I've seen firsthand the positive benefits that it can have on a safety culture, as well as improving incident rates. So before we're going to move on from there, and next we're going to transition to some leading indicators that hopefully you're already familiar with. I'm sure you're using at some point, inspections and audits. Now, pardon me. As a safety professional, inspections and audits have been a daily part of my job during each stop in my career. There aren't many better ways to stay up to speed with the physical conditions in your workplace than to conduct regular inspections. So there are countless types of inspections and reasons for conducting those inspections. They could be equipment inspections, or like in our example we just used for trends and actions, they could be housekeeping inspections. They could be inspections for a variety of safety equipment like eye wash stations, fire extinguishers, first aid kits. Um, some are going to be required by relevant regulatory agencies. For example, if you have a forklift on site, you're going to be required to conduct a pre and post use inspection to ensure that it's in good working condition and that the operator is fit to operate it. If you're required to have a spill prevention, control, and countermeasures plan, you'll need to conduct regular visual inspections of your above ground bulk storage tanks. But by conducting regular inspections, you're going to be able to catch many problems before they become problems. As you continue to conduct them and log inspection results and findings, you may also be able to identify trends or problem areas. So, of course, that's going to depend on the type of inspection you're doing, but this is going to allow you to take a deeper look at those areas and work to pinpoint what's causing the problem. And again, correct it before it becomes a serious problem. The frequency and the results of your inspections ultimately are going to tell you how you're doing and inform you of any risk in your workplace. Now, probably one of my favorites. I know I said this about near misses too. Maybe I just love safety that much, but one of my favorite leading indicators are audits because you can audit anything. So audits can be much more in depth than inspections, and they can be used to gauge the strength of your policies and programs, as well as how good you are at implementing and maintaining compliance with them. They can highlight gaps, which will allow you to continuously improve and strengthen your policies and programs. Um, but what I particularly love about audits is that they're highly customizable and you can tailor them to address or impact your lagging metrics. So if you have an identified trend, you can develop an audit to target that trend. Even if you have a stronger solution or corrective action in mind, you can use audits as a supplement to that. For example, say you have a string of incidents related to safe lifting of automobile tires. Currently, I'm working in the automotive industry, so that's a bit near and dear to my heart. They're heavy, they're awkward, and in the industry, we see a lot of strains and sprains related to the lifting of tires. So as a corrective action, you might implement, an engineering control like some sort of lifting device, or as I see many of my clients do, maybe you install a tire hook or sometimes called a tire hanger on an automotive lift to limit the amount of lifting and lowering of tires that a technician would have to do. The hangers are usually mounted within the power zone of an employee, so they naturally promote safe lifting habits. However, they only work if you use them. So, um, as with many industries, in automotive, we have folks who, they've been doing the job before you were born, or they've never had an issue or an injury related to lifting before. So they don't see a need for using these hangers and they get in the way, they're a nuisance, whatever, right? Nonetheless, though, we are going to require our employees to use these hangers. So to supplement the installation of these new safety features and ensure they're being used as expected, you could develop an audit to be conducted daily, randomly, right, to make sure employees are using them. As you compile data, you can look at the number of audits conducted and the defect rate to assess risk of future injuries. And by defect, I mean an instance where somebody's not using the hanger for this example, right? You may even find, and there's a good chance that you find that over time, there's a correlation between defects or defect rate and the number of lifting injuries you have. The more defects you identify on these audits, the higher potential for an injury. And again, by doing this and reviewing the data, it's going to inform you of risk, hopefully, before you do have an injury. Another example, to ensure that your PPE policy, for example, is being adhered to, you can conduct an occasional audit to determine whether employees are wearing the right type of PPE as required for the job they're doing. So this won't only allow you to identify non-adherence to your policy and reduce risks by correcting that, but it can also have the effect of allowing you the opportunity to provide some coaching and engagement with your employees. Maybe, as you're doing these audits and you're coaching folks on the spot for not wearing their PPE, maybe you learn from them that there's a reason they're not wearing the PPE. Maybe it doesn't fit correctly or comfortably. Maybe this particular brand or model inhibits their ability to do their job correctly. We see this a lot with, for example, hand protection. So there are many jobs that require some dexterity or some sort of tactile ability, and there's certain gloves that promote that, and some that would inhibit somebody's ability to do their job well. So um, by doing audits, right, we're encouraging employee feedback and collecting that feedback, encouraging it, hearing it, and acting on it is such a huge piece of developing and sustaining a healthy safety culture. I will say this on audits and inspections before I move on. It's worth saying that inspections and audits are only effective if the person conducting the inspection or audit is documenting conditions and behaviors accurately. So there's generally a negative association with defects or misses. That's why you'll hear me use the word opportunity so much. If people are pencil whipping audits because they're afraid somebody will get in trouble, or they're afraid that they won't look good if the audit doesn't look good, then it's not going to be effective and it's not going to deliver the intended results. So if this is the case, your leading indicator might lead you in the wrong direction. So it's really important that for whoever it is that's conducting your inspections and audits, if it's not yourself, that you're educating them on the why, and encouraging them to produce honest results and an accurate reflection of the workplace. Otherwise, there's almost no point in doing it, right? So, um, the final leading indicator that we're going to touch on today is safety training completion. So, training completion is really important as a leading indicator in the workplace, not only, and I'll say most importantly, um, because proper training will aid in keeping employees safe and productive, but it will also protect the company from a regulatory standpoint. So, during my time in the EHS field, I've had many interactions with regulatory agencies, as I'm sure you may have as well. So, for example, when it comes to OSHA activity, I've been involved in everything from complaint notifications to serious incident investigations. And there has not been one time where I've interacted with OSHA in that manner where they haven't requested training records, right? So not saying that that's the primary motivation, but it is something else to keep in mind when deciding whether to commit or invest time in training your employees. And it's an area I see so many folks get wrong or just completely disregard. So back to the topic, safety training as a leading indicator. So, as I said before, training and training completion is crucial as leading indicators. Proper training can prevent many serious workplace injuries. So, as a result, if you have any gaps in training, whether it's related to the content or groups of employees as a whole, just missing the training, it can be a red flag and an indicator of risk for potential incidents in the future. You can use training reports to gain a holistic view of training completion rates and then begin working through the gaps with employees who are usually unknowingly putting themselves at risk by not completing their training. Training reports give us insight into how well your safety programs are being implemented in your company. Using valuable data insights, you can determine the levels of training course completion and pinpoint where areas of retraining are needed. So, I'm going to share with you, quickly three important pieces of training data that you can use to help improve your safety program. First is training completion. So that's just pretty straightforward. It's the percentage of training courses completed by your employees. And those can be a really positive leading indicator by which you can evaluate the implementation levels of your training program. Next are training incompletions or incomplete training. So the percentage of incomplete training courses can be used to evaluate possible risks within your company. Incomplete training courses also indicate potential knowledge gaps in your workforce that could lead to future accidents or quality errors. Finally, is retraining, and I think this is one I see get missed quite often, right? So um, there are going to be some training topics that you're required to do retraining annually on from a regulatory perspective. Um, but you can also use data on repeated incidents or near misses and incomplete training courses to make informed decisions on what retraining is needed to keep your workplace safe and to prevent incidents. The reports you need to make data-driven conclusions about your safety programs ultimately are going to equip you to maintain a safe and healthy working environment. You're already likely training your teams in some way, shape, or form. So analyzing your training completion data and addressing gaps is just another way that you can use leading indicators to improve safety performance in your workplace. And often the benefits go beyond just safety. So I'll say this, right? And this is, maybe based on my experience of working with, operators in my career, but safety and productivity absolutely go hand in hand. So if your employees are taking the time to do the job safely, then they're likely doing it as defined by your SOPs, which means they're also doing the job the correct way. In the end, this will pay dividends in terms of both productivity and quality. So the investments you make in terms of safety related training, it's going to have a trickle down effect and help you make improvements in areas where you might not have expected. So to round out our discussion on leading indicators, considering that there are many more leading indicators than what I covered today, I want to leave you with 6 steps that can be applied to using any leading indicator effectively. One, pretty obvious, but you're going to want to start by choosing your leading indicator. Two, generally want to set a goal for the leading indicator. So if we used our training example, maybe you identify some opportunity or gaps in your training and you set a goal for 90% completion for all employees by the end of March. Pretty aggressive, but well worth it. Three would be to communicate to the team about the indicator, the goal, and how you'll track it. So also probably going to want to explain to them why you've chosen to use this particular leading indicator and why it's important. Four, start using it by collecting data, measuring your progress, and then creating a plan if you need that to meet it, and communicate progress to the team. Five, assess or reassess the goal or indicator. Sometimes indicators and goals can take a while to collect enough data, so be sure that you're reviewing things regularly. And finally, respond to your key learnings, share them with the relevant teams, and change things based on what you learn. Now, that brings me to the end of my presentation today, whether this was an introduction for you or more of a refresher, or maybe you're already an expert. I hope you're able to gain a few new insights and ideas on how you can use leading and lagging indicators to improve your workplace. Maybe you learned that you can pick your dandelions and make a salad with them. But just remember that we've really only just covered the tip of the iceberg in terms of both leading and lagging indicators. There are so many data points and inputs available to you. So, with a little bit of effort and some creativity, you can use leading and lagging indicators and make them work for you and ultimately create a happier, healthier, safer, and more productive workplace. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Alan so we can transition into any questions or comments you might have.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Greg. Before we start the Q&A, we want to remind everyone of the evaluation survey we're asking you to complete. The survey will open in a different screen after this webinar, and your input is important because it does help us improve our future webcast. And as a reminder to our attendees, if you'd like to ask a question, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And again, if we don't get to your question, all unanswered questions we forwarded along to our speaker. First question, how do you track training competency? I see people train in a time-saving mode in order to kind of quote unquote get her done or check the box.
Yeah, no, very fair question, and that's one that I've probably been guilty of in the past, right? Especially when it comes to computer-based trainings. I think a solid way of training competency is knowledge checks. So whether you're doing an in-person training, which I generally feel are much more effective, although maybe not always feasible, you're able to engage with your audience and ask questions as you go along, or even finish off with a quiz. And then often nowadays you'll see with computer-based trainings that there's going to be a knowledge check, and if you don't meet a certain uh, a certain grade, I guess you could say, right? You might have to take the training all over again or try the quiz again. So um, that's probably how I would answer that one. Just would be with knowledge checks and to the best of your ability, engaging with folks because there is, what I like to call like death by training or PowerPoints. So maybe another best practice would be planning how you're going to deliver your training. If you're going to throw everything all at everybody at once at the beginning of the year to get over with, probably going to have some difficulties with competency as well.
Our next question, do you have any recommendations or strategies or resources to kind of access injury or incident info considered protected by HIPAA or HR policies?
Yeah, so let me think. Let me make sure I'm understanding that question correctly. So maybe you're asking from the perspective of someone who might not have direct access to that injury and
Mm-hmm.
accident info. So if you're in a position where it would be you'd be the person, or it'd be important for you to have that, you certainly can collect injury and accident data without violating any HIPAA or HR policies. So for example, if we're looking at incident types, you don't need to know who strained their back, but it's really important that you had a back strain and how it happened. So probably a that might be more of a conversation with like someone like an HR manager, where sometimes they're not always aware of what we do with data or where we're violating HIPAA and not. But you certainly can collect injury data without making any of those violations. The recommendation obviously would just be leave names, gender, titles out of it, and you can generally stay pretty anonymous and get that data.
Our next question, this person says, I use Power BI to show the indicators to the team. Is there an easier program to use?
So I'm not quite familiar with Power BI, but kind of setting me up for a little plug here. So I will say that there are there are many cool ways to log and visualize your data. But really during my time at KPA, I've been really impressed with some of the programs that we use and have had a lot of fun working with those. So we do have a program that is one of our more recent developments and offerings called KPA Flex. It's a program that makes your data visualization super easy, but also very impactful. So you can generate flexible reports based on real-time data. And we'll even work with you to configure dashboards that are tailored to your business's unique requirements and ultimately allow you to leverage those leading and lagging indicators that in a way that's very simple and user friendly, but also maximizes safety improvements and performance.
Someone asked in the Joe's example, what if the ice is at a location that is not within the company's control?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. So that would be something, and I'm assuming maybe you're like in the past, I've um had situations where maybe we don't have the capacity on site for all of our employees to park, and so we've got to rent a lot potentially, maybe that like or lease a lot from a landlord. So maybe that's the type of situation you're asking about. Um, it can be tricky depending on the details of the circumstances, but what I would say and what we've always done in the past was as part of that contract or negotiation, if you have the flexibility, you've got to work into that some agreement on how that lot's going to be maintained and by who. So maybe it is just as simple as saying, hey, look, we're renting this lot from you, we want to keep our employees safe, we need to maintain it, and maybe it's as easy as that. Or maybe part of the deal is that the landlord's going to do it for you. Ultimately you're going to have some oversight. So as part of a winter weather plan, right, for the example with Joe, we would certainly include the monitoring of any like offsite property. So I hope that that sort of helps, but yeah, that one can be tough depending on the circumstances for sure.
Our next question, do you incorporate EHS program KPIs in the written program, or is it too dynamic to include in a control document?
um so I guess that one's a bit tricky because it depends on what kind of like written program or document. So it definitely is pretty dynamic if you're gonna include like specific goals for like a target number of injuries or a reduction. But there might be some times where it makes sense. So probably, I guess to answer directly, Kurt, that one in a written program, my preference or recommendation would probably be to keep it vague in terms of like clear goals, but something you might be able to inject there is just, some verbiage around, hey, we're as part of this program on an annual basis, we'll assess our performance and determine future goals for reduction or something like that, sort of like a catch-all statement. But to your point, it would probably be tough to include specifics.
Our next question, would you recommend that the safety team, hired safety professionals, complete all incident and injury investigations? Well, how do you feel about the leader and safety committee members doing an investigation?
That's a good question. And again, my answer is going to be just my opinion, but I like to, when it comes to incident and injury investigations and root cause analysis, um, I like to think of it as like a team effort. So if we're restricting the opportunity to conduct the investigation to just the safety team, we could be missing out on like some really key important information. So for example, if we have somebody get injured while using a piece of equipment, it's it would really benefit you to have maybe a member of the maintenance team involved. So as part of that information, you can get an idea of how often is preventative maintenance completed on this piece of equipment, or even what does that preventative maintenance look like? Was it completed last month for this piece of equipment? I've always recommended having your leadership team involved as well. And then I think sometimes it even benefits you to have employees involved. They often have, if the affected individual, right, feels comfortable enough, like no one can explain better to you how or why an incident happened, and often they actually have some pretty good recommendations on how to correct that. So my opinion and what I've seen and what's worked for me in the past is actually having like a team of folks involved and not just restricting it to the safety team or the hired safety professionals.
Our next question, once you've hit the kind of the quote unquote zeros on your OSHA 300 for a number of years, are there any tips to avoid the institutional arrogance and kind of maintain a continuous improvement mindset at both the management and worker level?
Yeah, and that one is I will say, and that's why I kind of made a, a a joke about that earlier and made a comment. I've seen that happen all too often, and as I'm thinking about some of my clients who have the zeros, there is a bit of arrogance or complacency sometimes that begins to creep in. All I would say is, you can focus your attention elsewhere once you're doing good in terms of injuries, right? So, like you can begin to focus on those other lagging indicators or leading indicators, like your performance in terms of near misses or your performance in terms of defects. And it's just a matter of like educating folks on the risk as those other indicators begin to build up. But that one is pretty tough. I will say, in my experience. So it's just a matter of keeping people involved in recognizing the performance, but also keeping them involved in sustaining it. So hope that kind of makes sense.
Our next question, have you ever dealt with negligent employee behavior regarding safety policies or procedures?
Yeah. Um, 100%. So, Nicholas, for this one, or the question is, how have you dealt with it? It that's sort of a tough one to answer directly, but I do think that based on the severity of the negligence or the violation, um, the consequences are going to vary. So, what my recommendation generally is defining as best you can a tier of um, negligent behavior or violations by severity, and then consequences associated with that. So, in the past, it's been a matter of retraining folks, right? Maybe there's a warning system based on the type of negligence it is, and then also, depending on what it is, sometimes ultimately there's been I've worked in places where there's a no tolerance policy, and if certain violations are like conducted, then fortunately the zero tolerance would result in a termination. So it really depends on the severity of the negligence and how you've educated people on your expectations in terms of safe behavior and the consequences if you make any violations.
Believe this is a follow-up question to the kind of EHS program KPIs. Would it be smart to include data points being monitored and, for example, crane safety program, target percent of operations audited with list of KPIs which formalize the data set?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, as part of like that program. And that's a good way to put it, Kurt. I appreciate the assist there, or the layup. But yeah, certainly as part of the program, you want to define what KPIs like you might be focusing on. Even go as far as having a target percent in terms of like defects or accuracy, things like that. So yeah, no, um, totally on board with that, Kurt.
Our next question, have you ever dealt with what is considered by management an over-reporter, someone who will report everything from a minor paper cut to something like a bee sting?
Hmm. Yeah. Certainly, I mentioned working in a warehouse with 2,500 employees. Absolutely have. And I guess the best way to handle that, Robin, really, I would say is you don't want to say take it with a grain of salt because all data is important, and it's certainly important. Like, this is a good problem to have. You have an employee who is super engaged and super interested and passionate about safety. So what I would say, oh, I guess you're talking about in terms of injuries. Still, what I would say is I would make sure the employee feels heard, and I would make sure that you like deal with them with compassion. And there are people who, uh, when we talk about pain levels, right? It's pretty subjective. So I have dealt with folks like that, and as best as I can or my team could, we just are, try to be very patient with them and compassionate and make them feel like they're cared for. So it's I think a good problem to have. And I think part of like your success there is going to be how you have the conversation with the person as well, instead of, and I'm not saying that you do this, Robin, but you could get impatient and annoyed and dismissive. Um, but instead, just I think your energy would be better focused on reassuring the person, right? Comforting them. And that's probably how I'd approach it. But I know where you're going with that because I've certainly dealt with individuals like that.
I was actually curious myself. How do you know which indicators are right for a certain industry or organization? Um, yeah, I just want to make sure that people know what may be the right choices.
Yeah. So I think like sometimes I do think that comes with time, and maybe it'll come naturally to you as you're learning a new industry. Like, for example, going from one to another, now working in automotive, definitely there's a learning curve to see how performance is measured in a different industry, how success is measured, what the pain points and where the risk is in each industry. So probably, I know it's not a great direct answer, but I think with time and experience, the leading and lagging indicators that are most important or impactful are going to like present themselves to you. And then it's just a matter of like recognize that and leveraging them. So the answer could be different for every industry.
And what are some best practices for using a mix of leading and lagging indicators?
Yeah. So actually, touched on one today, but I would say without a doubt, developing a living trends and action document that you maintain and review on like a weekly or monthly basis is a perfect example of like harmony or synergy between lagging and leading indicators. So in a document like a trends and action, you're obviously monitoring, documenting your lagging indicators, but at the same time you're potentially developing leading indicators to impact those lagging indicators. So we use the example of a trend of slips, trips, and falls in a workplace. You have all these lagging indicators, these incidents, and to address those, or at least in hopes of addressing those, you partner with your leadership team, your safety team, whoever it is, your safety committee, um, and come up with ideas or a plan to address those lagging indicators, and then measure the completion and the success of the leading indicator, and kind of compare the two and see how, like, if there's a correlation, if your leading indicator or your leading input is having an impact on the lagging indicator. And generally, those documents, I use just one piece of it. But if you are looking at a warehouse, right, you have different departments. Maybe for each department, you have different risks and the trends are going to be a bit different. So if you have a living document, a living trends and action document where you're kind of covering everything, you're able to use like a perfect mix and balance of both to ultimately improve the safety and the conditions of your workplace.
Looks like we have time for probably one more question. So I have a lot of safety analytics. How can I get all that data visualized and make it easier to see trends?
Good question. So, um, already, I guess, who asked it? Someone asked it earlier and kind of took the opportunity to plug, um, KPA Flex. But um, I would say just when it comes to visualizing, find a program. We've got a great program at KPA for doing that, but find a program that does the work for you. where you can log and visualize the data. A program that's customizable, so you can create dashboards, or you can adjust the visualizations, whether it's how the data is like input or how they spit out the data. So certainly, I think left some contact info up here, but KPA, we have a variety of offerings to solve, for that. And really cool new one is KPA Flex.
Well, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we have run out of time today. I'd like to thank our awesome presenter, Greg Horn, the entire team from our sponsor, KPA, and of course, everyone who joined us today. Take care and have a safe day.
Thank you.